Hi, this is JP Newman of Investing on Purpose. And gosh, am I excited today to have a dear friend, serial entrepreneur, one of the most interesting people that I know from the conversations from impact in business to leading a great life. That would be my friend, Brett Hurt.
Thanks for having me.
Oh gosh, Brett, I've been wanting to do this for a while. We have so many great conversations that I've thought I would love to have you on my podcast to share some of the ways that you think. I just think you're a thought leader with a really unique way at the way you look at the world.
Well,
so
thanks so much for saying that. And welcome to our home.
It's
cool to be doing this in the home.
This is great. I'm going to do, instead of doing all of Brett's bio, I will give you guys more, but obviously CEO of Data.World, founder of Bizarre Voice. And what's interesting I find about you, besides all the good stuff as friends, is that I don't think I know anyone else as a serial entrepreneur who's actually founded 6 companies. I mean, that's a lot. And what I learned about you from the experience, Brett, and a lot of it was on our last trip together, was I don't think most people think of business or creating businesses as art. I think they think of it as a strategy. And what I really see with you, the more I get to know you, is you're actually a conductor and you're actually an artist, is how I see you now. Because yes, you have all these strategies, phenomenal book. I highly recommend, which we'll talk about.
You.
But beyond the strategies, you actually have an artistry. You have a way of thinking that is like an artist. And when you put these things together, all the pieces, culture, strategy, service, purpose, and I just find that really fascinating.
Well, isn't life like a canvas? And we're all painters in life. And I chose to be a business person because that's my natural calling. As you know, I've studied Vedanta, and one of the things about Vedanta being an over 5,000-year-old Indian philosophy is that if you're living your purpose, you're going to do your best work. And of course, that's in Man's Search for Meaning, which I reference in my book, written by the amazing Holocaust survivor and inventor of logotherapy, Viktor Frankl.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate you saying that. I've never thought of myself as an artist. You're the first person to say that, to my knowledge. But I do view myself as an entrepreneur who is trying to shape the world for the better.
Yeah.
And do it alongside great teams and spend my time on this earth trying to really make a better world, as we say in Judaism, tikkun olam.
Yeah.
And that is very near and dear to my heart, my nature. And, part of the reason I started the 6th company, Data.World, was to influence the kids. And it was so incredible that recently our daughter Rachel was on a podcast for her first time talking about her jewelry business. And it's just absolutely beautiful what she says on there. There's great advice for young and old people. It's on the Jewelry Business Academy podcast.
Yeah.
And our son Levi has already been on his first podcast talking about his plan to create a world of unlimited energy through something called a Dyson swarm. And, I was very deliberately focused on influencing the kids with this next one, with Data.World, which I've been doing now for 7 years. But Data.World actually is the manifestation of my entire career. You can always look back, as Steve Jobs said in his famous commencement speech, and kind of connect the dots in reverse. That speech always stuck with me. And I didn't quite get it when I first heard it, but I really get it with Data.World, because all of the prior companies I've started have literally been building blocks to this point in my career. And I just couldn't be more fulfilled or happy right now. And that doesn't mean that every day is great being an entrepreneur. There are definitely struggles and hard times with it. But to create something from scratch with a team you love, a mission you love, and create a better world, I mean, how amazing of a life is that?
It's incredible. And that's kind of why I called you an artist, by the way, just this distinction. You work hard like many entrepreneurs. I know you work tireless hours, you work weekends, but you also do it with joy and in some ways effortlessly. And that doesn't mean that you don't have to put a lot of effort, and it doesn't mean that you don't have hard days, but I see you go with your instinct and you're going with your spirit. And also, for those of you who don't know what Data.World is, tell me if I'm saying this right, is it really the database that aggregates all databases? Am I saying that correctly, or how would you say it?
No, there's 2 parts of the business. So one is It is the world's largest website and community for open data sets.
Mhm.
These are data sets that are released by the government, by foundations, by universities, by NGOs, and the rest. And there was no place for them to call home where people could really collaborate on these data sets out in the open
Mhm.
and contribute to the public body of work. And we're a proud B Corporation, as you know. The second part of the business is the part that sustains it, because we're a for-profit company. A B Corporation is a for-profit company. And that is taking the technology that we built for free for this open data community, which now has over 2 million people in it.
I said 90% of Fortune 500 companies are now using
Yeah,
the data.
over 90% of Fortune 500. Actually, the most recent stat, which I was really stunned by, is over 3,400 of the universities in the U.S. There's 4,200.
Wow.
Which is kind of incredible.
So before, for instance, if they're looking for research, they'd have to like literally search the web, go like really, really hard to put sets together.
Yeah,
and then with Data.World, it gives them a chance not only to just easier access to a lot more information, collaborative sharing of data, basically, of data sets. Is that right?
Yeah, and then if they found the data they wanted before, then they were operating in a silo with no knowledge of what other people were doing with that data.
Right.
And the commercial side of our business is taking that technology and applying it to private data for corporations, and we're becoming the most deployed data tool of all time for those companies. And you can think of that as like a private Data.World for very large companies like Prologis and WPP, who's the world's largest advertising agency conglomerate, and the Associated Press, and a number of others, where we are their internal search engine and their internal collaboration platform connected with all the data tools they use to allow them to become really world-class with data. I was actually on today with the CEO of one of the largest retailers in the US, and I was mentioning to her how the ROI for this is so obvious, because to be data-driven means that the majority of your employees are able to easily find the data they need to do their jobs well, and that leads to more efficiency and more effectiveness as a company, and that means higher top line and better bottom line.
You said something, and maybe, and I know it as, I've never thought about how you said that all my other 5 companies threaded in perfectly.
Yes.
Into creating, this is like my opus, right? This is my
Yes.
opus. My. Can you tell us a little more about that? Like how?
Well, I have to give a lot of credit, and I'm going to space on her name right now, which is embarrassing. But the woman that founded the Red campaign with Bono.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I know. I know the Red campaign.
Yeah. So she's a Henry Crown Fellow, and I'm also a Henry Crown Fellow in the Aspen Institute. And she was pressing me really hard in this workshop one time and saying, Brett, why Data.World? You could have done anything. You'd made enough money from all prior companies. You could have just retired, et cetera. Why Data.World? Why this? Why is this your calling? Why? And it really got me to go on that inner journey. And I was like, oh my gosh, like since I was a kid, I've been absolutely enthralled with mathematics, enthralled with data. Like people since the beginning of my childhood have always said, one of the things I love about you when they're talking to me is that you're a seeker of the truth, that you're always trying to find out what the real answer is. And in fact, mathematics and things that surround mathematics were my favorite classes. And if you go back to my prior companies, just take the past 2, which turned out to be really big global companies, Core Metrics was a search for the truth about businesses online and how they're performing in online ads and the navigation and the merchandising promotions they're running. When we signed Walmart at Core Metrics, that was one of the greatest days of my career. And then to see Walmart literally transform the way they did their business and be so confident in us that they actually, Walmart put out a press release on using Core Metrics.
Wow.
Which was amazing for us in the industry.
Probably a game changer for you, right?
Wanted to use us. And then Bazaar Voice was a search for the truth about what people really think about products and say about products and engage in word of mouth. Bazaar Voice means the voice of the marketplace. And, it was one of the top 5 IPOs of 2012. It was over $1 billion
I remember that
exit. And, Core Metrics was an amazing exit to IBM. And so this journey of the truth and mediums where the truth had not been available before. Like if you think about how people were grasping at straws for understanding word of mouth, they were doing focus groups and surveys and anything to try to give them like, why did people return this product? Like, why is this flying off the shelves? And all they needed to do was just let people talk to each other in their online medium where word of mouth became digitally quantified for the first time in human history. And
so you're saying basically people speaking in normal language rather than these boring marketing surveys where people are trying to ascertain what the public is saying. You're just saying, let's forget all that and just go to the actual voice of the marketplace.
Yeah. And I love that you just said that, JP. I mean, you're so smart and you're such a good friend and you've got such a beautiful spirit. And what you don't realize that in terms of what you just said there is that you are embodying the spirit of the Clue Train Manifesto, which was a book that moved me so deeply. And chapter 4 of that book is called Markets Are Conversations. And the Clue Train Manifesto is named the Clue Train Manifesto because it's saying businesses need to get a clue that the most important force in the history of the world when it comes to commerce is word of mouth, is people just talking to each other, two people sitting like this, like talking about, you and I were just talking about The Mandalorian season 3 starting today and how excited we are about that.
Right.
And
well, even the book I gave you, like, I don't give out many books, but like the idea of just, we always want to transfer information that has moved us, or an experience or a product or a service that moved us. We want to share it with friends, right?
That's right. And I literally named Bazaar Voice, the voice of the marketplace, after chapter 4 of the Clue Train Manifesto. Wow. And to this day, that chapter is the best marketing chapter of any book that I've read. And I'm really looking forward to diving into the book you gave me because you found eternal wisdom in there. And
I did.
There's eternal wisdom in lots of great books, but they are pretty few and far between.
Yeah. And then I imagine for you, for Data.World, again, when you say that, because your framework, I'm hearing you're a truth seeker, as you said. So the truth for in this being the pinnacle is really allowing information to flow and not be blocked so that people could come to better whatever they need, or whatever they're researching, whatever they're doing. Yes. It's a way to basically have information flow directly so that people can build more authentic platforms. Am I saying that right? Or do you see it differently?
You are saying it right. And one of the things that was so amazing about my journey since I was 26 with Core Metrics is that, the thing that really turned me on in those businesses was seeing someone like Walmart transform the way that they were doing business. Like that was stunning to me, being like some small entrepreneur and seeing, the world's largest employer at the time do that and feeling like, wow, like we're a part of business history. We literally have transformed the way that Walmart operates.
Yeah.
And that high you get, that helper's high, is just so profound. And then seeing that happen at Bazaar Voice. But if you think about it, the transformation at Core Metrics was just their online business. They did create some of those insights into their offline. Bazaar Voice, it was really focused on their online business. But again, word of mouth is something that is, offline as well. I mean, we're going to talk to each other all day long without a company trying to control us, right? We can say whatever we want about any product or service. That's just word of mouth. And Data.World allows me to now affect, with an incredible team, the entire business. We were talking about data about everything in the world on the scale of our community, and then everything within a business on the scale of the companies we work with. And that's why we're becoming the most deployed data platform in history at these large companies.
Amazing.
It's really a very, very fun journey with an incredible team. And as you know, we just got named one of the top 3 companies to work for in Austin.
I saw that, which you consistently seem to do with your companies, by the way. You always seem to. I want to talk to you about that. I have one more question, then we'll talk. I actually want to talk to you about that. That's a good question. Do you know why you're a truth seeker? Sometimes people are just born into the planet a certain way, and sometimes there was an influence from your dad or your mom, or do you know where that comes from? That deep searching for truth.
I don't for sure know. I mean, there's a lot of forces in my life that have shaped me. I mean, one is that my grandfather grew up during the Great Depression and was the oldest of 6 kids, and his father deserted the family, and he had to literally raise the family with his mom, raise his siblings with his mom. and then put himself through school. And he was very smart, and he graduated from UT Austin, then became a professor because I think he was too afraid to be an entrepreneur because he had grown up during the Great Depression.
Right.
He was a product of that.
Right.
And he became one of the greatest mathematics professors in the history of UT, and pioneered so many different forms of mathematics. And he constantly would quiz me as a kid every time I came over from my earliest memories. It felt a little bit uncomfortable. He was doing it out of a place of love. And I didn't quite understand what he was doing because he was asking me these mathematics questions that I was too young to learn in terms of the way schooling works. And I'd be like, I haven't learned that yet. And he would say, well, let me show you. And when I was in 8th grade, I tested like a 13th grade math level. And that's when I knew like what he was doing. But I had that natural inclination, that born spirit for mathematics.
Yeah.
And mathematicians are very kind of rational, logical thinkers. And I've got that part of my brain. But I also grew up a nerd, as you may have been able to deduce from this. And I started programming when I was 7 years old, and I programmed over 40 hours a week from age 7 through 21. And Our son is doing the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Right now, he spends every waking moment outside of school and homework programming, which is the majority of his time. And, with programming, it is also very logic based, but being picked on so much for growing up here in Austin, back when programming wasn't cool. You may remember the movie Revenge of the Nerds.
Of course.
You're both old enough to know that movie.
Yeah, of course.
And grew up in an environment where you're picked on because you're different actually makes you more of a truth seeker, because there's a part of you, it's just like, if we could just connect on a brain to brain level and not worry about physicality and like what we look like and like what the color of our skin is or anything else, and just like love each other for being human beings, then it makes you a curious type of person.
Yeah.
And it gives you, if you let it, some superpowers in connecting with others and not judging them. I mean, you could be talking to one of the most amazing people you've ever met, and if you approach everything like that with childlike curiosity, then it's amazing what you'll discover. And everybody has superpowers. Every single person.
It's amazing. I know Elon Musk talks about that when people say, "What was your secret, Elon Musk?" And it was actually a very similar thing. As a kid, being bullied, lots of books, and gain that time to kind of process and see the world a little differently. So that's really, I never really thought about it. It's kind of interesting. Yeah. I want to go back to what we were talking about as far as a little bit of culture. I mean, I look at you, Brad, and you and I both hang around a lot of entrepreneurial circles. Mm-hmm. Austin 100. We have you speak. You're Henry Crown with the Aspen Institute, but very few people successfully have 6 companies as a serial entrepreneur. Like, I look at that and say, what's different about Brett? And what I'm actually specifically want to ask you, and again, I really recommend this book by the Entrepreneur's Essentials. If you guys have a chance, I read it and I was kind of blown away by the book. I've got more notes and what have you.
And by the way, all the proceeds for that book go to benefiting female entrepreneurs. So
that's awesome.
I'm not making a dime. It's actually a program at UT Austin that Kendra Scott endowed.
Amazing.
And it's called the Women's Entrepreneurial Leadership Institute. And primarily it's women of color that are showing up, which isn't that surprising. If you think about it, 50% of Fortune 500 companies in our nation are actually led by either first generation or second generation immigrants.
Yeah.
And a lot of companies on NASDAQ were founded by first generation immigrants.
Makes sense.
Country. It's hard to leave your country and go to another country. You tend to be pretty resilient.
You're gonna fight hard. So what I wanted to ask you is, there was a twofold question. One is, what do you think, because you've spoken to thousands, maybe hundreds, or you've spoken to so many individual leaders. What do you think is different about your approach, not only from a standpoint of your ability to create successive companies, but then also, I know you're really big into cultural impact, leadership, vision. Like, tell me more about your secret sauce. What's your secret sauce of how you do this?
Yeah, it comes from my parents. So my dad was unique in that he had a highly inventive mind. He had lots of different patents, and he was a real innovator. and my sister and I joke around that he's kind of like a Lemony Snicket type, complete with all the humor too. He's a great storyteller and just really, really amazing and super smart, super creative. And he taught me that if you're not passionate about something, just don't do it. He literally would not do it if he wasn't passionate about it. Now, I was frustrated with him as a kid because he was so brilliant that I would be like, Dad, that's like $1 billion idea. And I've always been such a capitalist, like ever since I can remember. And I was like, Dad, you have a chance to change the world. And he's like, son, I'm bored of it now. And he's like, goes to the next thing. So I don't get as bored as easily as my dad did, but I've got that DNA where I learned from him. I just saw it since I was born that only do it if you're passionate about it. And that creates a level of authenticity in everything you do. And people can sense authenticity. I mean,
Definitely.
they know if you're authentic or not. They can just see it. And then
by the way, just on that authenticity, what I've noticed coming from Sony in the days when people would pitch me ideas, if someone's pitching you an idea for a data set company, I'm just making it up. Usually in the ether, there's 6 companies at the same time. It seems like ideas come at the same time. And I would read scripts about hummingbirds or whatever it was. Like it'd be the same story being pitched to me. But you always pick the one that you go with is the one where you can feel like there's either the author or the creator of the story has such a deep connection to the idea. It could have been an experience they had.
Right.
You feel that energetically, that authenticity that you're talking about.
Yeah.
So I know that to be really true. You could have 6 of the same ideas and 5 could fail.
Yeah.
I would bet on the jockey that I feel is obviously they have to have the skills on it, but the most ingrained, most passionate, authentic about.
That's really cool. Yeah, I don't know anything about like the inside of the media business. So that's a really neat insight. And I think it's just a human thing that you can feel authenticity. I mean, you can see it all around you.
Yeah.
Like our rabbi, Neil Blumoff, is one of the wisest people I know. And it's because he is deeply authentic in his calling and deeply studied in his calling too. Because look, if you're authentic about it, you're going to learn everything you can about that. You're going to become an expert in it. And as Woody Allen said, 99% of success in life is just showing up. So if you eventually the student can become the teacher in any industry if you're just curious enough. Elon Musk actually is a very good example of that, where he didn't know anything about making rockets or cars and became kind of a savant at it because he just, relentlessly studied it because he was passionate about it.
Right.
And his calling to fight climate change and everything else.
Which goes back to like the podcast Investing on Purpose, which really is what is purpose. And it really goes like, what is the roots of purpose? I actually talked about this last week with a thought leader named Jesse Elder. Creativity, courage. The more you're leaning into that, and you can feel it's like this natural process. Maybe that's what makes human beings a little different. Yeah. But we have that ability. Dogs don't say, I feel like lemonade today. Dogs are dogs, trees are trees. But humans have this wild idea of getting wildly excited about certain ideas, which we call authenticity. And I think it's a reason for living. I mean, it's our expansion, right? It's a spiritual path. It's not just
that is the point of the book, Man's Search for Meaning, which was Viktor Frankl's #1 seller, sold over 20 million copies. And he lost everything in the Holocaust. He lost his wife, he lost his children. And the only thing that kept him going is that he was authentic to a cause that he wanted to see fulfilled. And he literally invented a whole field of psychology and wrote 20 books about it. But his #1 seller was his book about the journey of his search for meaning and how important that was and how important he saw that was for others during the
creativity in your head was the difference of life or death in his case.
Yeah. And then the second ingredient is love. Love is the universal answer in the world. And all the love I have in my heart really was placed there by my mother. My mother was just absolutely 100% about me and my sister to a fault. I mean, I sometimes would beg her, like, please, like, do something for yourself too. But she was just such a loving force. And when you're a leader that loves, you're a leader that motivates. And so
I love that, by the way. That's great.
And so it's that I profess my love very often in front of everybody in the company, and they can feel that it's authentic, and I really mean it.
It's amazing.
And so that's, I saw that on stage last week. Indeed is one of our customers, and Chris Himes is now, he's CEO, and he's now leading a company of 15,000 people. He started, it was 150 people. And I think he's one of the greatest leaders we have in Austin. And Chris exuded love on stage when he helped me kick off our quarterly all hands. And I want to kick it off at a customer site. And next time we have it, it's at Bazaar Voice, which is another customer of ours, which is a company, as you know, that I led and founded. When you see that love, it's infectious. I mean, I was just on with several of our team members today on a Zoom, and they said that was their favorite all hands because of how Chris kicked that off as one of our customers. They're like, it's clear that his love for what we do at Data.World is profound. It's clear his love for Indeed is profound. It's clear he has a real purpose and calling in the world. And so, to lead with love is to lead with so much less stress, and to bring out the best in people. And if they're in a mission that they really believe in, and they know that they're in a place that they're really loved, then it's really hard to lose.
So, Brad, I love the idea of leading with love. I don't think you hear that from a lot of successful entrepreneurs. It kind of blows me away. I've never thought about it in those terms, but we keep using the word purpose, but actually it's love. If you really think about it, even in my apartment buildings, to the residents, when we're doing our programs, I'm ultimately wanting to show them respect, and respect is ultimately love, right? When you really come down to it. So I really appreciate that. How does that form? I mean, one of the things that I've liked least about being a small entrepreneur, I've got a teeny team compared to yours, but I've always said employees, it's difficult, operations are difficult. Human capital is the most important thing, and yet it can be, you're managing personalities and what have you, and yet it seems like a part of your formula for success is culture. Hiring correctly, interviewing correctly, and putting teams together, and then of course inspiring those teams. How do you do it? Because that's one of the hardest things I find about business.
Well, that's actually part of the reason I wrote the book. Debra and I have invested in 130 companies over an 11-year period now. And
with your own family office.
With our own family office,
right.
Family Investments. And I would frequently get asked this question, and I would answer it for the entrepreneurs that either we invested in or we didn't. And eventually I was like, I just need to write this down because this seems to have high utility. Like, they come back and they tell me that it worked. And basically it started out with analytics and a journey, so going back to mathematics. At Core Metrics, when I was 26, when we'd hire a salesperson, they would work out 50% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to go talk with other CEOs, and they said, hey, that's our metric too. Like, it's fine. Just put more people through the funnel and just expect 50% attrition, meaning after 6 months, 50% of them are going to get let go.
It's a lot of churn.
And I thought, wow, that's horrible. And I would tell them, like, the opportunity cost is super high on both sides for them and you. And, it feels horrible to let someone go, right? It's bad all around. And so with Bazaar Voice, when I was founding that with Brant Barden, my co-founder, I said, I don't want that to ever happen again. And one of the stories I told Brant is that when I was a kid, I thought that I wanted to play electric guitar because, I grew up here in Austin and listening to Stevie Ray Vaughan and Jimi Hendrix and all of these amazing guitarists, David Gilmour of Pink Floyd, and just thinking, wow, they can make the guitar sing. I want to do that. And I picked it up and I hated it.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I think that business is like that too, where it's a bit like romance. And for some people, it's romance about the money. They'll be like, wow, I can go there and I've seen all these .com millionaires and yada, yada, yada. And there has to be a way to test, like, are they really authentic in their pursuit of this passion or not? And given that it's romance, how are they going to know? And so we came up with this test that I write about in chapter 11 of the Entrepreneur's Essentials, where we essentially put them in a role play. So for a salesperson, we ask them on a Friday, after we've already done all the interviews and everybody's like, yep, pretty sure we'd hire this person. We ask them on a Friday, hey, could you come in on a Monday or Tuesday and present to us like we're a prospect? You'll have around 45 minutes to present. The rest will be Q&A. And this is the most important part of the interview process. I know it's kind of a burden to ask you to do this. We can't give you any materials. Like, you're going to have to do this from scratch and tell us which prospect to role play. But look, we wouldn't ask you to do this if we weren't really interested. And over 95% of people take on that challenge.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have any metrics when I first started to do that. And we did that literally since the beginning of Bizarre Voice. And what you get when you do it that way is you get an opportunity to see what a day in the life is like. And when they're presenting, you're asking yourself, would I buy from this person? Like, have they really done their research? Do they really exhibit that kind of passion, that authenticity for this cause? And as a result, at Bizarre Voice, we were right 75% of the time.
Incredible.
Okay, so that was a massive jump in metrics. Bizarre Voice went from 0 to 100 million in sales in 6 years, had $1 billion IPO, was rated the number one place to work in Austin when it was small, then medium, then large.
Amazing.
And the number one thing I would attribute it is to the way we hired. And we did this across all roles, not just sales.
Every role. Ask you, was it just interesting?
Every role had.
Were you like for instance, like let's say it was an IR tech, a very technical role, just for an example. Sure. I imagine you're less worried whether they had the knowledge about the specific thing. What you were looking for was the amount of work, the amount of discipline they put into it, the thought process. I mean, whether they knew your controller system didn't really matter, right?
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Is that in the face of competing alternatives, competing job prospects, how much time would they take to really go for it with us? Because that's a test of the soul. It's a test of someone's mettle. It's kind of like, if you think about the hardest things you've ever done in life, for me, one of the hardest things was getting into Wharton. Like, I studied really hard for my GMAT. I worked on my application essays for 2-3 months. Debra, my wife, would read them and say, you're not answering the question well, just start all over. And it was really frustrating. But what Wharton was doing there, and at the time, it's always been in the top 3 schools, but at the time, it was the number 1 rated for 6 years in a row by Business
School.
Week.
Yeah.
For business school.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to get in. I really thought that the environment I'd visited, I really thought the environment was speaking to me. And I got in, and it changed my life. And as a result, I was in this environment where everybody else had been through something like that. They had all been tested in that way. And therefore, we all appreciated it more. We were going to make that 2 years for our MBA really count. And those are still some of my closest friends today. The Henry Crown Fellowship was another very intense experience. Pursuing my wife, Debra. I started as a freshman at UT Austin, and I couldn't convince her to go out with me until I was a senior.
That's amazing.
We were about to celebrate 27 years of marriage.
So your point is, for people, it kind of makes sense. Your point is, if once people really feel like they've earned something, they first of all, did they even stick around? How committed are they to this thought? Are you one of 20 serials, or is this one they really want? And once they really want it, do they have the skills, and do they really have the basically, are they tied into basically the thought process and what have you? And then ultimately,
and the passion.
The passion.
Yeah. I mean, is it really speaking to them? Because if something's really speaking to you, like our daughter is a great example. Her business is called Radiant Jewels. And for Rachel, it naturally speaks to her. Like, I don't have to tell her, and I wouldn't tell her, like, hey, you should start making some jewelry right now. Like, I know you like to do it. Why don't you sit down and do it? I don't have to say anything like that. She sits down and she spends, 20, 30 hours a week making jewelry, in addition to taking all AP classes at her high school.
Because it's what she loves.
Because it's what she loves to do. And nobody needs to tell her to do it. And I don't need to tell Levi, like, hey, you should start programming right now.
Yeah.
He just naturally does it. So if you're if you're truly authentic to your calling, then, and if you hire people that are truly authentic to the calling of the collective, a company has a soul, and it's a collective of the individuals that form that soul. It's not just the founder; it's the whole company.
Interesting.
Soul.
Yeah.
And if that collective soul is one where it's beating strong and it's like mission driven, it's like we're gonna do this no matter what it takes, then it's very hard to lose if you hire people like that are that driven.
What if someone in your past has been that driven, but they weren't quite as skilled as you'd want them to be in communication, or something that you really felt that, let's say they were a 10 on the soul thing, but maybe 7 or 6 on the skill thing that you need. Would you take a chance to train them because they had the soul thing is the number one thing, or would you really need to see the whole picture for you when you're hiring?
In very, very few circumstances, we would let them take the test again. And it's because we could tell that. And those people that took it again, that we hired the second time after they took it and did much better, turned out to be some of our best employees.
That's really
because
good.
Now it was even harder for them to get there.
Yes.
And they were even more mission driven to perform. And so that, yes, but it happens rarely. I mean, usually people just bomb quickly. And, I'll give you a great example at Bizarre Voice. This one salesperson I was so excited about. I was so sure they were just going to ace it. And then I gave them the message and they said, hey, I'm going to a wedding. Unfortunately, sorry, I can't do it that. So can you give me an extra week? And I'm like, no problem, So this person had a lot more time to prepare, right? Not just a weekend. They had, over a week to prepare. And they showed up and they just felt like an empty windbag. And I said, hey, and I always ask this question, how much time did you take to prepare? And I knew the answer. And they were like, maybe 3-4 hours. And I said, well, very respectfully, the people that do well on this, they take 8 to 12. And you had more than 3 times the amount of time that they've had to prepare. And so, there's always this question for sales success in technology. Was it the salesperson or was it the sales engineer or was it someone else?
Right.
And I'm like, respectfully, we just can't hire you. Like you weren't compelling at all in the presentation. I don't care that you're the number one performer at your current company. I think that's great for you. Great for them.
I've seen a lot of resumes. It's like dating. Everyone's got the perfect picture posted the first day and the perfect description. This is what you need to get to.
Yeah, this one I knew that they were the number one performer though at their company, and I was like, this calling just isn't for you. I don't know why it's not for you, but it's just not for you. And they were a little bit surprised, maybe a little bit in shock by that. But we saved each other a lot of time. Like, think about if I'd hired them and then
oh my gosh,
had to let
one of
them
the
go
hardest
in 6
things.
months and they've left their company.
It's the hardest thing to do. It's talk about energetics of having to train someone and then they just go and all the wasted time. Even if they stay a year, I just had someone leave after a year and it was disappointing. But the truth was, it probably wasn't perfectly aligned from the beginning. And I think great human being and really tried hard. It wasn't a lack of effort. It just wasn't really. I've never really heard it put that way. Like this idea of like a collective soul of a company. And I just think it wasn't the collective. It wasn't the right fit.
It wasn't the right fit. And for whatever reason, their soul was repelling them. And I respect that because, not everybody's meant to do what we're doing at Data.World.
The other thing you mentioned in your book and your digital companion too, which I've been using, you've been teaching me how to hire better, is you mentioned that when you get a reference from somebody, everyone's going to, if you let the employee give the references, here's my 3 references. Well, they're going to pick the great references. You're not going to really hear what you want to hear. And if you also how you ask the questions and what questions you ask. Mm-hmm. And I know you talk about in your book about having to ask questions that are more neutral rather than loaded towards that. Like for instance, what were the other areas that maybe that person could use some more developing in, like as opposed to just like what, tell me more about the person. And then the second thing I think you said is ask them for a referral from somebody else rather than like try to go one step away. So you can try to get a more honest referral, because I find referrals are mostly useless. Because again, if you're just calling them and ask, were they a good employee? Well, the other person's not incentivized to say anything except, sure, they were a great employee, but you're not really.
Especially the bigger company that they came from, because then they're worried about all types of liability
Right.
issues.
So
So they tend to not tell you really anything meaningful. So I've done, these types of reference checks a lot. And chapter 13 or 12, it's chapter 12 of the book. It goes really deep on this. And the best advice I got for this was from Scott Cook, who's the founder of Intuit. And Scott's process was, you spend, the 15 or 20 minutes hearing them, tell you all the reasons why they're great, et cetera. And then you, going back to analytics, you ask them for a comparison, and you say something like, let's just stick with sales because it's easier.
Sure.
We've already built out that example. You say, well, out of all the salespeople you've ever worked with, where would you place them on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the highest?
That's a great question.
And then if they say a 9 or 10, then you can ask them, well, why? And then they'll really tell you, well, compared to et cetera, et cetera. But if they say a 7 or 8, they'll also tell you why. Well, they're still missing this and this. And that's where you get to the actual truth of the matter, is that you get them to compare against other known people that they've worked with.
Yeah.
And you get them thinking that way. You're basically guiding them to force them to be analytical about it, and instead of just vague. And most things are just vague.
Love this, by the way. And I've already been using some of it. I think hiring is the single most important skill, actually, and I didn't really know why. Now I know why, because it's the collective soul of a company.
Yeah. Well, in chapter 12 of the book is really focusing specifically on not just doing that at the salesperson level, but especially doing that at the board of directors level, and doing that at the executive team level. Why? Because if you make the wrong moves there, then it can destroy everything.
Because they're not really in alignment with what you're trying to do as a company. It could be like they're squeezing dollars, or they're doing this, but then it may not be.
Or they just may be complete jerks, and you just have no idea, because they present so well. They're like an executive. Right. They've been highly polished. Maybe they've come from an environment where they had to claw their way up and do it in a very Machiavellian way. You just have no idea. But they come with all this panache. Right. And when someone comes with a lot of panache, the irony is the less likely it is that you'll check references. Like when I check references on venture capitalists that have invested, that are prospective investors in us, and I did the same thing at Bizarre Voice, and I did the same thing at Core Metrics. A lot of times the references are, you were the first entrepreneur to ever ask me about them. And I'm like, and they say things like, you realize you're talking about a billionaire and you're asking me about a billionaire. And I said, yes, I realize I'm asking about a billionaire. Just because they're a billionaire doesn't mean that they're an amazing, soulful type of person I want to work with.
Would you turn that down if you got a bad reference?
Absolutely.
So the money's that the money, the intent and the energy, or behind the person of the money, is that important in your mind as part of the formula of success?
Absolutely. Because if you have that incredible person with mission alignment and soul alignment with you on your board of directors, on your executive team, it's even more likely you're going to succeed, because now you've got the superpowers of their panache, of their background, of their connections. But if they're not mission aligned, they literally can destroy your company. So that it's funny, because people will do much fewer references on the highest level people, and they'll reference the heck out of like a junior engineer. Yeah. And it should be the exact opposite. You should do like much more if it's a board member. Yeah. And much less, it still matters if it's a junior engineer, because the junior engineer, you still need to get it right and everything. And I treat reference checks at that level also very sacred. But the junior engineer, they're probably not going to destroy your company, but someone high level could. So it behooves you to even spend more time.
I'm going to listen to this 10 times and play it over in my head, because I still think I have things to learn on how I think we've been very lucky, but I think there's really, I've never heard it put that way. And I think there's so much value in that interview and that reference process. Most people, and I've learned this from my own experience, do not interview and do not reference well. And it's so important. So thank you for that.
You bet. Absolutely.
We're winding down. I just have a question I want to ask you. When you look at the world, You and I are both very passionate about certain political causes that we've talked about. What is the role in your mind of an entrepreneur in terms of responsibility as a leader beyond his company? I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
you lead a large company. You've led large companies. You had a lot of employees. You matter. What you say has a lot of power. What do you think the responsibility of that power is? Both really actually outside of, let's say within the company, but mostly even outside in society in terms of responsibility.
Well, what's the old saying? To those given great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, you and I don't really have like this great power. It's not like we're president of the United States or
Right.
something. But the way I look at it is the more successful I become financially and in other ways, the more important it is that I lead by example and give back. Now, giving back is a very personal thing, and people have lots and lots of ways that they think about giving back. But what I'm trying to make the case for in the concluding chapter of my book, chapter 23, is that giving back shouldn't really be an option in your mind. And the reason it shouldn't be is that if you become successful in an endeavor, it is always the case, I've never heard a corollary to this, that you are successful, yes, in part because of your grit. A big part of it was luck, and people discount, but that is very true.
Yeah.
And then maybe even bigger part of it were the people that helped you. And if you want to go on the journey of giving back, you're essentially honoring the love of people that believed in you and decided to invest in you when you really, really needed it. And sometimes it could have been a pivotal piece of advice they gave you. Other times it could be that they literally were with you every step of the way on that journey. And for you to become that type of force, I think is very, very important to honor them and honor your journey. And so I've chosen to honor that journey in lots of different ways. I mean, the Henry Crown Fellowship was the journey where, again, someone believed in me. It was Josh Baer who nominated me for that. He's one of my best friends here in Austin.
Wonderful human being. Obviously the founder of the Capital Factory here in Austin, Texas. Wonderful human being.
Yeah, wonderful human being. And Josh was like, Brett, you are Henry Crown material. You need to do this. Now, when he nominated me, if you had asked me what the Aspen Institute did, I would have assumed that it was some type of nonprofit dedicated to tree preservation or something.
Right.
I had no idea what the Aspen Institute was. And then when I started to study what he had nominated me for, I was pretty blown away. I was like, wow, this is a real gift that Josh is trying to give me. I got into the program. It was transformational for me. And in the program, I did a lot of readings of MLK and of Ta-Nehisi Coates, A Letter to My Son, and lots of other readings. I mean, it was a 2-year-long program. We did lots and lots of readings on all types of topic, global and ethics and all types of things that would hit you in the head or hit you in the heart really hard. And then you would have these deep discussions about it. And I was really broken by some of these readings because I just assumed like, hey, we've progressed to the point where racism for sure is in the past. Like there's no way that that's today. I mean, it's, I understand the original sin and it's horrible and it's an ugly part of our history, that this country started with slavery and that this country initially was built on the back of slavery. And I was like, but both things can be true, right? That we had this ugly past and that this is the best time to be alive. And I actually do think it's the best time to be alive for a black man or woman or anything else. But when I read A Letter to My Son, I'm like, this is a modern day article about how he needs to have a talk with his son about how the black body can be broken down and abused by people because of the history that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought to myself, there's no way this is true today. This has to be unique to his experience. This can't be true. And there were fellows that are black in the Henry Crown Fellowship that told me, hey, and these are very accomplished people. Unfortunately, it's still true. That's how we feel today.
Yeah.
That is how it is for us.
Mm.
And I thought, it just broke me. It like literally made me just break down in tears.
I understand.
And that's led to me having a desire to say, okay, Bazaar Voice, one of the great things that happened about Bazaar Voice is that there are now 70 companies started by former Bazaar Voice people because of the financial outcome. They got the know-how, they were part of the know-how, and then they got the wealth to start their own business. And that creates ripple effects in capitalism, which is a beautiful thing. And so with Data.World, I was like, well, I'm going to be on a mission to make this the most diverse technology company. And I'm going to do it because I'm going to make a bet that it'll make us perform better. I'm going to make a bet that it'll be a heck of a lot more fun. Because you think about the best of America are all the foods, all the music, all the literature, all the architecture we enjoy, that the fact that we all came here as immigrants, except for Native Americans, and we built this land together and created a lot of beauty. And there's this broad diversity in every form. And I'm talking about in business, I'm talking about in, architecture, all of those things I mentioned, literature, that just is incredible if you really think about it. It's like the best of humanity is on display in the best of America. And so I'm like, we're going to have a heck of a lot more fun. We're going to perform better because we're honoring the best of America and doing that. And if I do it early, then it's going to create a windfall event because I'm confident that Data.World would be successful, like Bazaar Voice. As a matter of fact, I think Data.World could be a much, much bigger company than Bazaar Voice.
So you might have a second unicorn.
Yeah, and so
you probably will.
Well, hopefully, and certainly we've got the grit. We've got a lot of luck too that has happened already. We've got the most amazing team of investors and such an incredible internal team. So we've got a lot of ingredients. But basically, I was like, wow, we could create generational wealth, like if we really focus on diversity. And I talk with way too many CEOs where it's like, I can't hire Black engineers or, Black people in sales or whatnot in technology. It's just there's not that many. And I always tell them, I'm like, hey, very respectfully, you're showing up at the wrong places. Like, the way the world is wired is that, you and I are Jewish. And if people want to meet more Jewish people, they could ask us because we know a lot of Jewish people.
Sure.
But people that aren't Jewish don't know nearly as much Jewish people. They might not even know that we're Jewish, right? And if you're a woman, guess what? You get invited to female events. If you're a Black woman, guess what? You get invited to Black female events.
Right.
If you're, Latinx, you get invited to Latinx events, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
And so basically, if you show up with a helping hand at those places and say, hey, we're building something pretty amazing. It cuts across, data is like universal. We're talking about data about everything, including, racial progress and everything else. Then, you can start to recruit, and one thing leads to another. They invite their friends in. They're like, this is the most amazing place I've ever worked. And next thing you know, you have a diverse company, and we're over 50% diverse today.
Incredible.
At Data.World. So I'm talking about that, but in that chapter, but it literally could be about anything that you now have a platform that you can build a better world through, like practice tikkun olam, as we talk about.
Your business, your company becomes the platform.
Yeah, and you as an entrepreneur, given that this is my sixth business and my prior business, exited for over $1 billion, and the business before that exited for around $300 million. It gives me, and in our investments, we seed backed over 10 unicorns now.
Wow, that's incredible.
130 companies we're in. And so
10
over
unicorns.
10, yeah.
It's a pretty good batting average there, Brett.
That's pretty good batting average, which is a real honor to those entrepreneurs. Those entrepreneurs are really amazing. One of our top entrepreneurs in our portfolio is a female entrepreneur, first-time entrepreneur, Julia Cheek of Everlywell, in Everly Health.
I know Everly, yeah.
Who's just amazing. And so, essentially you have a bigger and bigger platform as you progress in your success to affect change in the world. And by the way the Henry Crown Fellowship started is Henry Crown was a Jewish immigrant into the United States who came in with less than $10 in his pocket, and he became a multi-billionaire in Chicago. And one of the things
Retail, wasn't it retail?
it was in all types of areas. I mean, it was pretty broad in terms of
How he did it.
his areas, but it was all like good, soulful work. And he would bring other successful people together in Chicago, and he would look around and he would say, "You see the river's polluted. You see this. You see that. If we don't make this change, who will? Like, we know how to affect change. We did it through capitalism. Like, let's create this change and let's change the world together." And when he passed away, his family endowed this program at the Aspen Institute to say, let's find people that are the next Henry Crowns, that are people that have had success, that can affect change, that now want to do it at a bigger platform.
Well, Brian, I know the tagline, by the way, which is like, really, it's in my body right now, is from success to significance.
Yeah, I love that.
That stopped me.
Yes.
Because I really think, well, that'll be my next episode about just kind of my own path. But this idea, like, so many people out there are just trying to like make a buck or launch their first company, or then they get, and it's great. Like, I remember when I made my first $1 million, it was a big, big deal, but it also left me kind of depressed because it didn't change who I was. Exciting.
Right.
But that's not where the joy comes from.
Yeah. There's a bit of emptiness.
There's a bit of emptiness.
And part of it is a head fake for you. You're doing that to yourself because
you think something's supposed to change radically in how you think or feel.
I felt a little bit like that after Bizarre Voice because I had made enough money where I never had to work again. And I actually, for a while, tried to retire. And I did stuff like, did a lot of bucket list trips, and I traveled around the world and went just all over the place. I would travel like 3-4 months out of the year. And I would have traveled even more, but, my children are young and, needed to be here for school and everything else. And one of the things that I realized is that I was with my wife, Debra, and we were in New Zealand, and this was like the 3rd year into this. And I was looking out on this beautiful, beautiful landscape, and I just felt completely empty inside. And it's because I was missing and not honoring that calling that I'd had since I was a child. Like, I was a child programming at age 7 because I wanted to change the world. And I wasn't meant to just ingratiate myself with the money I had made. And so I wanted to affect change, and that was when Josh Baer nominated me.
That's amazing.
And then, and honestly, the Henry Crown Fellowship is one of the most transformational experiences of my life. And it's amazing what other fellows have done with that program, including even the B Corporation movement. I mean, that was a Henry Crown Fellow, J. Cohen Gilbert, who decided to start a new form of capitalism, Capitalism 2.0.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Brett, I have so enjoyed this conversation. I'm always amazed that when I'm with you, I learn, and I feel, not just learn, but I feel so much. And
well, right back at you, brother. I feel the same way about you.
Thank you for your time, your sharing, and I look forward to continuing the journey together.
Awesome. Me too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.